Hi everyone, welcome to another book review. I hope everyone is still doing well in isolation, and I really hope that you are taking some time to learn something new and to ensure that you are just growing as an individual. With that being said, it's taken me longer than expected, but I'm finally done with Steve Jobs' biography, which was written by Walter Isaacson. Man, this book is really special. It is absolutely captivating, and at the same time, though, it's the only book that I can remember where I would hate Steve Jobs or hate the subject, love them, hate them even more, and re-fall in love with them again as the book went on. It was very, very, very really challenging emotionally because it touched on how he reacted in different spheres of his life and with different individuals as well. And it's crazy how he could just switch to being this really passionate or loving individual in one setting, and the next it can be really as cold as can be. And I think if you've watched the movies, his two movies on his life, they touch on it, but from what I can remember, they weren't really that well done. But they touch on how different he could be depending on the situation or the individual that he was dealing with at the time. So maybe let's get through quickly just the structure of the book and what you can expect. So the book is 571 pages. It has 42 chapters in it. So it's quite a lengthy book, and it really touches on, I would think, every aspect of Jobs' life from early childhood really up until he finally gives in to the cancer in 2011. So I'm just going to take you through roughly how or what the different sections are. There aren't any specified sections in the book, so there isn't a part one, part two, part three, part four. But I've kind of organized it in my head in the following sections. So the first eight chapters are pre IPO. So everything pre IPO, pre 1976, I think it is. So it covers his childhood, of course, much publicized giving up of Steve Jobs. So the fact that he was adopted, how that happened, and how he dealt with it in his early childhood, and who his parents were as well. Because I think that gives a good context into how he was raised and why he turned out the way he did, or some of the reasons why he turned out the way he did. So the adoption theme is very omnipresent, I would say, throughout three quarters of the book, I would say. The theme really gets revisited, and it seemed like he only became comfortable with that part of himself in his latter stages of his life. But everything he did before that, the characters he'd meet, the words such as father figure, for example, would be thrown around, and he was still trying to get through or define the relationship that he had with his kids and all his kids, so those in his marriage or the last marriage that he had, as well as those that he had out of wedlock, right, which is the famous Lisa, for example, which is a big subject in the movies as well. So they talk about that whole relationship, him finding his dad as well. How did that mess with him? How did that feature into his everyday life and his relations with other people, right? So adoption is going to be a big theme in the book, but also what the part I enjoyed the most, and because I think even in his commencement speech that he gave in Stanford in 2005, the famous speech, he speaks about him dropping out of college, and kind of that 2 year period where he was finding himself, he finding his personality and tapping into some of his real interests or things that he found to be important. And that time is very interesting because, again, maybe it's because he was a young person, and I can still remember, my university years as well. Maybe that's why I love it so much. But that part was very interesting because it really details this courageous young kid, this daredevil, man. I mean, this guy went to India just to explore his spirituality, and that's something that never went away with him. I mean, even when he was worth millions of rands and at the top of his game, he still lived, to a certain extent, a very Zen and very Buddhist lifestyle, which is incredible. And it's one of the things that I think are interesting about Steve Jobs. Speaks again to that extremism, right? On one end, you're selling these really expensive devices, but on one end, this guy has one outfit, doesn't eat much, eats one type of food, doesn't eat meat, all of that type of stuff. It's very, very interesting, to be in the mind of Steve Jobs. It's like this hippie that never grew out of the 60s or the 70s, right? It's very fascinating. So that's the first 8 chapters of the book, and then from there it kind of picks up where he meets Steve Wozniak, who they founded Apple Computers with, of course. And that really details the beginning of Apple and their different philosophies as well. Because remember now, Wozniak is this really smart guy working for HP at the time, really brilliant at what he does. And then there's this Steve Jobs, Oak, who's a hippie, and really philosophical about his views on the world, including computers and technology. He had a very clear view of how technology should be made and what role it plays in society. So it talks about that in the beginning. The biggest differences were the hacker mindset of a Steve Wozniak, right? He wanted everything to be open source and very open to customization. And as you know, if you've had any Apple device, Steve Jobs' take on technology is that it should be closed systems, it should be owned by the innovator, right? So he believed that if you really want to make a good product, you have to marry and own the entire value chain. So you have to own the hardware, the software, and the applications on top. Not only that, he even took it a step further in the 2000s, where he wanted to even own the experience in the shop. So when you're actually buying the Apple product, he wanted to even own that. So that level of vertical integration is was insane, because again it took it to an extreme, right? It took it to an extreme, and it worked out for Apple. But that speaks more to a philosophy, I would say, before it speaks to a business strategy, right? Because it's not an easy one, and especially when the likes of Microsoft, who monopolized the software game, had the complete opposite strategy, which was more of a horizontal and open source strategy and view of technology, right? So kudos to him, and that's going to be the theme, especially at the end when he explains the making of the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. It kind of talks to that initial philosophy starting to bear incredible fruit, right? Because at the end, when that started to happen, nobody could catch Apple, simply because everyone was open and had a completely different view of technology than Steve had. Okay, so that would be, so you at about 17 chapters now, right? So you're having the meeting with Steve Wozniak. We're starting Apple Computers. Cool. We're going public in 4 years. They go public in 4 years in 1980. They're all millionaires. Boom. We're out here, right? But now that brings about a different type of beast, because, okay, now you don't own the company, right? Now it's shareholders that you have to answer to. And I think they were in their 20s still at the time. So everyone knew, they themselves, Steve also knew, that he was not ready to run this huge company. He wasn't ready to run a public listed company, and Steve Wozniak had no interest in running this company, right? So here he goes and he tries to find someone who he thinks is going to be suitable, is going to keep the ideals of Apple but still grow the business, right? Finds Here comes in John Scully from Pepsi, and it starts off well. It's kind of like, again, bringing the theme of father figures. He had this idea of John that he would learn and feed off him what he didn't already have, right? So how to be this corporate leader, how to complete his game in a sense. But then it ends up backfiring on him. Ends up losing control of his company that he founded. Ends up being ousted from Apple, right? Now, now at that point I was like, okay, this is sad, but you don't really feel sorry for Steve because he was a bit of a jackass, right? He was really difficult to work with. He'd have all these temper tantrums. He was super emotional. He would cry even in meetings, which I found very bizarre. But again, I think it's the extremism of someone like that. So he gets ousted from Apple. Where to from here, right? Starts that next computers, and I think he was very fortunate around that couple of years time, because although he was doing well, not with Next particularly but with his other venture at Pixar, which was one of the, I think for me, most interesting parts of the book, because I don't really know that world much, that animation world. So to first of all just decode how he now finds himself in another industry, and he brings this attitude of, oh, okay, I know what's going on, I know how to make this thing better. I found that was incredible, because that self-belief is just on another level. So goes to Pixar. I mean, again, I think fortunately that team was already such a brilliant team. They just needed someone who would bring that insane vision with it, and luckily also had the finances to inject some money into to the company, and take the technology forward, and let these creatives really explore the highest level that their talent can get them, right? So they create these amazing movies, or they have this amazing technology, and they start talking to Disney, right? Who was, again, at the time, they had a good run of movies, The Lion Kings, The Beauty and the Beasts, I think it was. So they really at the pinnacle, or so it seemed, of that game. And so to partner with this smaller company, but that has this amazing talented individuals, could only bring about success, and it did, right? So I didn't even know that Toy Stories, for example, was, born out of those engagements, and born out of that Steve Jobs experimentation, right? Cars and all these other great movies. So that I was like, this guy is crazy. This guy's amazing. But then Apple really found itself in a rough space, because now they brought in this corporate dude into this company that was very culture and philosophy heavy, right? Under Steve and Wozniak, especially under Steve. I mean, he was trying to push this very specific agenda. It's a vertically integrated company. We control everything, and it's all about design and engineering. So now you bring in a salesperson, essentially, to run your shop, and that's a whole different looking company. Worked for a couple of years, I guess protected the numbers, but then it started to show, because the products just weren't good enough. Boom, Apple seemed to really be in danger of extinction, and that's when they needed jobs back at the fold. So I think he was very fortunate for that to have happened, because one, he went out, explored his other talents on these two other companies, Next and Pixar, built up his experience as well running a big companies and turning strategy or philosophy into actual action and success. And then you have his baby here, Apple, who is still passionate about really needing a savior. Right? And I think for Steve Jobs, that's the ideal combination. Boom, comes back the Messiah, right? So he comes back, and all the leverages, of course, in his court. Everybody, the markets now, I think also are saying maybe we need that Steve Jobs magic. That's the only way to kind of save this ship. And so he did. He comes back, and it's very zen like. He doesn't want a salary. He's just like, I'll work for $1, just coming back as an advisor, blah 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 blah. That lasts maybe 2 years or so, and then boom, he finally took over as permanent CEO. But the most important thing that I learned when he came back is focus. He really drove focus. So when he came back, it's like there were all these teams doing half-baked stuff. And the first thing he did, he just came back and everyone was pitching to him what they did in the business, what are they working on, and what's the significance of it. And he was just slashing people. Nope, nope, that's not gonna work. No, no, no. Or keeping the good people, but discarding of the bad products or bad endeavors, right? But that also led to retrenchments because he had to lean it up. He had to come up with 3 or 4 things that Apple's just gonna focus on. So that's how Steve Jobs worked, and I think that was a huge lesson for me. That focus, right, in a company, to say stop having all these divisions and all these people running things, right? Everybody must know what Apple is doing. Everybody in that company had this amazing clarity. We are doing 4 things. So that you are working on this, and this. Nothing else. It was very, very clear. And I think if you know anything about big companies, that's one of the things that really frustrates me about them, is that you can have people working or seemingly doing stuff, but they're not really producing anything. They're not really doing much, or at least anything of significance, right? And it's very painful to confront that as a leader. I would imagine, to come in and say, no, that's not necessary, out, or join that team. And Jobs managed to do that, but also infuse this incredible standard of excellence. If you didn't meet this A player grade, you're out. Simple as that. You're out. Right. So, and he brought in some of the people that had left, some people that he knew that had talent. So, that was the big thing that he really changed at Apple. He just brought in focus, and it really bear fruit. So company turned around. They started making great products again, and yeah, that I guess cemented his credentials as a CEO. Now, everyone kind of took him seriously, that he was able to say, okay, now it's my way. I'm going to choose my own board, pretty much, and I'm going to choose my own people to run the company, which I had a problem with, because I would have thought someone like Steve would actually be open to having disagreeable people in his circle. Not to say people who just cause a ruckus for the sake of it, but people who would challenge him. But I found that he very much wanted to be the center of that company. The board was picked by him, and it was only people who were loyal to him. And I just thought that was quite whack. I thought that was weak, personally. I thought his ego there was just too enlarged, and I mean, that was just weak. I didn't enjoy that part. But yeah, so that's what the third part, I guess, covers. That's about how many chapters? It's about 5-ish chapters. And then the last 10 chapters really speak about all the innovations that Apple brought in. They really killed it from, I think, the early 2000s. They destroyed it. I think reading about the iPod especially, That was insane how that changed the music industry. But at, from to I think to appreciate how spectacular that was, you shouldn't only look at the fact that okay, the music industry was under threat because of piracy, like Napster. I downloaded on Napster back in the day. Napster was popping, you got free music, blah blah blah. But that wasn't the biggest thing, because what really shocked me, and they outlined it, describe it very well in the book, is the fact that a company like Sony had all of the tools to do what Apple did with the iPod. They had the Walkman, right? So they had the Walkman back in the day. Apple had never ventured into anything outside of computers. Sony had the Walkman. They were in the music business, Sony Music. They were in the music business. What else do they have? And they produced a whole lot of other technology, right? Technology products. We know this. Sony PlayStation, right? So they had technology, they had music, and they had a previous music device in the Walkman. How could they not create what Apple created? I'll tell you why. It's because of I spoke about just now, the normal corporate bullshit, right? Sony's divisions were at war with each other. That's the problem, right? So the music division, Sony Music, would not benefit if this iPod like product came into fruition, right? And especially, they wouldn't allow themselves to be cannibalized by their own brother or sister, right? In the technology division or whatever. So everyone was trying to protect their little interests instead of working together and let Sony win. And that's what Apple and under Steve Jobs was good at. He's able to say, we're shutting down that project. You guys come here, you're going to work on this. You guys come here, you're going to work on this. And they create a great product for us, for you and I, right? For the consumer, no matter what goes on in the background. But Sony, because of its segmentations and all this corporate nonsense, everyone has their own target and number and so on, that got in the way of them producing and changing the world, which they were actually well positioned to do. Apple did it with the iPod. Amazing. Then, again, also speaking to vertical integration, right? Because they own the device. It's synced to your laptop or Mac, the Mac and device. And then it also worked on the iTunes software or application. So they owned everything, which is crazy. And that was the preface for what came next, which was the iPhone. Because he still, listen to this, right? Remember that Sony example I just gave about cannibalizing yourself, how Sony didn't want to eat themselves. Apple allowed themselves to be eaten by Apple because the iPhone replaced the iPod. They didn't allow anybody else, whether it's Motorola or whoever, to say, let's come up with a jacked up phone that's going to take as much music as the iPod carries, has as much software integration as the iPod, which would then pose a question to you and I, why buy the iPod? They did that themselves. A couple of years later, or 4 or 5 years later, iPhone comes in. They ate their own lunch. But again, Apple as a collective won. And the teams won because he didn't allow them to get so caught up into, oh, I'm in the Mac team. You could be moved around depending on what's the hot new product. And they took technology from here, put it over there. So nobody got complacent and nobody hoarded that information. So that, as a business lesson, blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. And yeah, it really changed how I looked at things. So yeah, that's pretty much what the most important parts. The iPhone, then the iPad pretty much just took that to a little bit. Did the same thing that the iPhone did, but for books and or other types of content, really. Right. So, but I think the main takeaways are very evident here. I don't want to make a video that takes up a whole hour, but the main takeaways are so evident. I mean, when you look at Jobs' philosophy, that philosophy just sticking to it, and at the end he talks about how It was really a slow burn. It only made sense after time. Even his co-founder Wozniak was not a fan of that. But after he saw the iPhone and the iPad, he went, now it makes sense. Now it makes sense. Owning, the hardware and the software and the applications together. It makes sense because you can make incredible product at the end. You couldn't have done that if you were having Dell hardware, Google software, Microsoft this and that, and also in different type of devices. The versions would just be strange and the performance wouldn't be the same. So that's what Steve Jobs protected, and that's what I think Apple users like, consciously or subconsciously, that type of seamless and consistent experience. But it took time. But I mean, when you look at the culture as well that they have, innovation cannot be separated from Apple at this point in time. So incredible, absolutely incredible book, incredible figure. Would I want to emulate Jobs? Probably not. When you look at his personality, there were so many things, especially when we factor in how he dealt with his family and stuff. That was really quite sad. You would have thought he especially because he was adopted and given up and stuff, he would have taken care of that a little bit more, but he really didn't. He neglected his kids and stuff, and that's pretty sad. So that's not a part I'd like to emulate at all, to the point where he even says at the last chapter of the book, when the biographers ask him again, like, so tell me, why did you really do this? And it's so sad. He says, I wanted my kids to know me, because they didn't have a chance to know me all these years. I mean, that's as sad as it gets. So I think it would be tough for anybody. We're not going to have another Steve Jobs, is what I'm saying, because from a philosophical perspective, just the way he took, or the way he conceptualized technology and meeting design, right? Because that's how he described it. He wanted to make products where technology meets design, like the sweet spot, sweet intersection where that happens, and the products that come out are very design and engineering heavy instead of just technology for technology's sake. So we're probably never going to have another Steve Jobs, and someone who was also so, eventually at least, commercially successful, right? When you look at business executives, I mean, he punches up there with the best of them, but yet he was really this hippie, alternative kind of entrepreneur. So yeah, but I took a lot out of this book, and it's really changed the way I wish to frame my career. And I can't say that about a lot of books. There's really a few books I can say that about, but this one, for example, really brings me to appreciating the importance of quality and in product. I'm talking in product, right? Like, because I'm more of a salesman type. I have more of a salesman type flair, but this really brings you to, without incredibly good product, what's the point of doing anything? To be honest, he was so hell-bent on that it's hard not to consider it as a reader. So for me, I think it's permeated my mind. I'm definitely going to be looking out, hopefully as I rise up the ranks, to really place an emphasis on great product above anything else, above numbers, above anything else. Great product, it's important, for long-term longevity at least. And why is it important? Because look at some of the companies that were killing it when Jobs was coming out, the HPs, the Dells, all of them, a lot of them, even Microsoft, a lot of them have went through this really dark dip, right, where they had to refine themselves and re-energize. And I think Jobs's philosophy, standing tall for all those decades, really tells me that, look, to place an emphasis and to almost be stubborn on quality and on and knowing what your company is standing for can never be in vain. So I appreciated this book. It's gotten me thinking about a lot of things. I've been doing a lot of research on other companies as well. Kind of just trying to find some of those ingredients that were present in Apple's success. I'm trying to really, again, learn a little bit more about what makes a company successful over decades, over different types of leadership as well, So, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm really glad I read this book, and I hope you enjoyed this book review as well. Listen, man, I would really recommend you get this for, especially if you're building like a library collection, because this is one of those books that will stand out, that no book's gonna, no, because no individual can give you this type of content. So make sure you get it if you're building like a library or a book collection. I promise you will not regret it. Get it if you love technology. Get it if you're in the industry as I am. You will really get a lot. You will learn a lot about the history as well of different companies in the game. So yeah, man, wow, I'm very happy with this book, and yeah, I would recommend it to all those individuals that I've just mentioned. But yeah, if you are thinking of getting it, let me know why. Let me know if you've enjoyed the video. Let me know if you've read it and you got something different out of the book. But that was my 2 cents on Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Next, I will be reading Satya's. What's his name again? Where's the book? I'll find it. I think it's that side. But the current Microsoft CEO, I'll be reading that book again. It's part of my research, just in the companies that currently exist. What are they up to? What are the ups and downs they've had to go through, and what are their strategies? Right. So yeah, have a blessed day and keep safe. Cheers.